For the longest time, I thought that I lacked discipline. I had no problem setting goals. I could take large goals and break them down into smaller, more manageable chunks. But when it came to getting things done, I just couldn't show up consistently, and I always thought there was something wrong with me. Then one day, everything that I knew about consistency got totally turned upside down, and I realized that discipline was never the problem at all. It all started when I decided to download a time tracking app. I decided that it would be better to focus a little bit more on the things that actually got done rather than the things that I wasn't getting done, just so I could feel a little bit better despite being so inconsistent. But once I started using the app, I had a surprising discovery. After about 1 to 2 days of using a time tracking app, I immediately realized that the problem was obvious. Time tracking pretty quickly taught me that I didn't have a consistency problem, I had a perception problem. And I was able to identify a combination of 4 problems that were showing up as inconsistency. First, I was spending way more time on things than I realized, which meant that most days I was trying to do something that just wasn't really that possible, and I had no idea that I had these high expectations. Second, on some days I was actually managing to hit those expectations, but the problem is in the long term that's just not sustainable, so naturally I couldn't keep up with it. But instead I was seeing it as lacking discipline and being lazy. Thirdly, I realized that the problem was also with how I was setting my goals. Now I could take a larger goal and break it down into more manageable chunks, but the problem is that all of these goals were still largely based off of the completion of doing something. But since I was operating from a place of severe time blindness, where I could think that a 3-hour task could take 40 minutes, these completion-based goals were not taking into account how long it actually takes to do them. And fourthly, deep focus or flow state was actually exacerbating these problems. Now, as someone who has previously struggled with anxiety, I saw a huge parallel between anxiety and flow state, and that both of these will take you out of the current moment and you are hyperfixating on something. The only difference between them is that anxiety is usually regarded as a negative thing, whereas flow state is usually regarded as a positive thing. But the problem that was happening was I would get so deep into flow state that even when I realized, like, oh, I've been spending way too much time on this, like, oh, maybe, I should cut it off here for today, I'd be so into it that I'd be like, oh no, let's just keep going, I'm in the zone. And this would lead to me skipping meals, delaying rest, and just neglecting myself in other areas. So once I realized these problems, I was able to come up with a couple of takeaways to help me set better goals and be more consistent. First, the main takeaway that I realized was I needed to shift from making completion-based goals to time-based goals. So this would mean rather than saying, oh, I'm going to do a chapter of Hungarian today, I'm going to instead just say, I'm going to do 30 minutes of Hungarian today. Now, I recognize that I was mainly doing this because I genuinely just felt like time-based goals didn't feel very satisfying. There was just something very hollow feeling about it to just say, oh yeah, I did 30 minutes today, or I did an hour today. But I clearly can't accurately estimate how long it actually takes to do something. So I realized that secondly, I had to change my perception of how I viewed time-based goals. Rather than bucking at the idea of them, because my time tracking app tells me that that is the solution, I instead asked myself, what could I do in order to make time-based goals feel just as satisfying as completion-based goals? So I came to the conclusion that I would still continue to make a list of completion tasks, but this would be more as a reference for me, as something that I could set aside just to check what's next. And I decided that every day I would commit to minimum time-based goals, and I would round that number down when I needed to. So I'll give you an example. So going back to Hungarian, I know that most days I spend about an hour studying Hungarian. So I could make a minimum time-based goal as 1 hour. But I know that a lot of the times I don't hit that 1 hour because I'm tired or I have other things in my schedule going on. And oftentimes I end up doing just like 30 minutes or so. So what I decided to do was I set a time-based minimum goal for Hungarian of 30 minutes. Because I know that most often I'm going to exceed that goal. But then on the days that I don't, I know that I'm still going to at least hit that 30 minutes. So with this little flip of perception, I was able to go from almost never hitting my daily goals to almost always exceeding them. And thirdly, what I do is now I set a timer. So if I'm only going to spend a minimum of 30 minutes on Hungarian, I set a timer for 30 minutes. Once that timer goes off, I know I'm done. I've hit today's minimum limit. And then I will go and check off I did 30 minutes today, and I will also write down what I did in that session. So the goal becomes the time spent, but the satisfaction comes from me logging and keeping a record of what I'm actually doing and what I'm accomplishing as I go throughout my week. Fourthly, just as you would not want to make long-term plans in a state of anxiety, I recognize that I also don't want to make any sort of long-term plans or manage my time in a state of flow state. So now I also use that alarm as a built-in mindfulness break. So what I do is, let's say I finish that 30 minutes of Hungarian. After that alarm goes off, I go and I set another timer for 2 minutes. And then I use that 2 minutes to just go and do something that puts me back into the current moment. So for me, that means I stand up, I go over to my window, and I just stare out the window calmly for 2 minutes. After that 2 minutes is up, I do feel a lot more calm, a lot more in the present moment. And then I'm in a much better state to make big picture decisions. Then, and only then, do I make the decision to continue to do more Hungarian or to totally just stop here for the day and go do something else. When I decided to stop trying to force desired outcomes and shifting more to realistically deciding how much time I could spend on things in a day, consistency just became inevitable.